odds and evens and everything in betweenins, it's your boy, Captain Brookworm. To celebrate my 69th Speedpaint, nice, as well as almost 350 subscribers, I'm redrawing my first ever Speedpaint. Well, redrawing, as I did take a stab at it back in 2018. It's still not good, so I'm redrawing it again. And while the speed paint goes, I'm going to talk about the general art problems in the original and in the 2018 redraw, and then we can see how much I've improved since then, as if it wasn't already very obvious. A little background. This was one of the first drawings I ever did when I decided I wanted to make art my thing. Yeah, I'd had art classes in middle school and I doodled, but these were the first ones after making the conscious decision to become an artist. I think the first drawing pretty obviously suffers from proportion issues. Ezra's torso is comically long and thin, and his legs are just way too short. Like my current style, I already draw legs a little longer than they are in real life, so to see them like this short really bothers me now. His feet are the same size as his eyes, with his hands being even smaller than that. Your feet are actually exactly the length of your wrist to your elbow, and your hands are supposed to roughly be the size of your face. Eyes, very variable according to style, but realistically, way smaller. Not supposed to be even close to either of those things. The face and hair actually aren't that crazy bad. They're nowhere near the proportions I use now, because I tend to de-emphasize the nose and sometimes the mouth, and then really focus on the eyes. And this one, the nose is what's focused on. But besides that little edge of the eye overlapping the nose a little, all the exaggerations could just be chalked up to stylistic choices that I can assure you were not actually intentional. I was going for realism. Or maybe anime, I don't know what I was going for. A lot of my proportions real changed up since then. Kanan's shadow hurts me to look at. Once you learn the proportion trick that the wrists should roughly be in line with the crotch, you can pretty much never unsee it when it's wrong. There's also just like weirdly simultaneously too much and not enough detail in it. Like there's detail in weird places, like the belt and the arm thing, but not the entire arm thing. It's very weird. The perspective, I don't even want to talk about the perspective. It's weird and wonky. We're moving on. The only two real anatomy issues I have with the 2018 version is that the head is like really lopsided and the jawline is bad. I actually took a stab at redrawing this a year later just to fix the jawline because I hated it so much. I never finished that one. You can also kind of see the shoes clipping into each other, I guess. I don't even know how to describe it. They should be overlapping at the angle they're at and the size they are, but they're not. The facial expression in this one is much more dynamic than the original one. You can see that I do keep the 2014 version for the latest iteration, but I now know how to make it give off the feeling I want instead of the more neutral, empty one. So pushing that expression in the 2018 version was a good choice for how my style was at the time. One thing I think it's worth mentioning is that the original was drawn before I got my tablet. My first 3 speed paints were either done with a mouse or just a pen and paper, and I used paint tool size vector line tool for all of the line art. Rewatching that speed paint for this was painful. So all of the lines are exactly the same width all around, whereas now I try to vary it a little bit, especially with the eyes. And it's also all on one layer. Despite all this, I honestly think the coloring in this one is better than the 2018 version. I picked directly from a model of Ezra, so it kind of accidentally fit with the lighting. 2018 version looks extremely flat, and the lighting makes it really unclear when/where the drawing is. It doesn't really look like it's inside, but it doesn't look like it's outside. The light seems to come from nowhere. It doesn't really look like it's coming from the door. It doesn't give off the feeling I wanted it to give off, which was him hiding in the dark. The part I'm most proud of fixing is the part that speaks more to how inexperienced I was when I was drawing it. A lot of beginner artists have trouble with how things with 3 dimensions and weight interact with other things with 3 dimensions and weight. For this drawing in particular, it's clear that I was almost afraid to draw things overlapping or touching. The arms of both Kanan and Ezra don't touch the body except where they absolutely have to. And whenever they have to overlap, they look weird. Like the fingers look really weird gripping his arm. We already talked about the legs and torso. They just don't line up like where they're supposed to connect. They really don't, because I wasn't thinking of this as a 3D object. It was just a 2D drawing. The 2018 version handles this a little better, but ultimately a lot of it suffers from the same issues. Honestly, that's what most of it comes down to. The line art, coloring, and shading on the first two pieces make it look like a flat drawing. Even though the eyes are way bigger and I use thicker line art, this newest one looks more 3D. So now we're going to talk about some of the things that I fixed for this new drawing. I don't do this for every piece, but when a drawing takes place in a darker environment, I use 2 to 3 different multiply layers to make sure the object looks 3D and in shadow. The first layer is an overlay over the entire image with the parts erased around where the light touches. The second is the kind of shading I always do, and the final one is for the darkest shadows, because sometimes the shading I always do doesn't really get into where it would be very, very dark. When I do this kind of shading, I also typically blur it. It just kind of looks weird if I don't. I've also been trying out a hard white highlight that some of my favorite artists use. I'm really loving it if you can't tell from the past like 5 or 6 speed paints. I don't know how long I've been doing it, but I really like it. Like I said before, the arms are in a much more natural pose, and I also used references to make it look right. Shock! If it wasn't clear, I didn't use references the first 2 times. The first expression was just way too neutral and dead. It's really hard to tell what emotion he's supposed to be feeling. The second one was good, but it didn't give the feeling I was going for, which was shock and slight disbelief, implied to be right after he'd been crying. Like he'd been crying and then heard Kanan walk up and then looked up at him. The eyes are the widest in this drawing, and the white pupils really draw attention to them, which I think conveys the shock better than the first one. I made sure they were the part of the face to focus on, whereas in the original, they really don't have that effect. They're not really shining or anything. Unlike in the first 2 drawings, I actually drew Kanan's silhouette without taking the perspective into account. This made it much easier to fiddle with it digitally and find the best angle to make the shadow look like a shadow. You could see me fiddling it with for quite a long time because the legs look weird unless they're at that right angle that I eventually get it to. I fixed the overlapping weird clipping shoes by having them deliberately overlap by clearly being on top of one another. Since I was removing the armor on his leg anyway, like in the 2018 version, I decided to go a step further and have him take off his shoes too, which made it easier to draw as I was drawing the soft fabric of his socks instead of his solid shoes. And that is the finished drawing. Anyways, odds, evens, and everything in betweenins, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, all those YouTube things, and have a great day.